Welcome to the Liberace Mansion.
Welcome to Under the Vegas Sun, looking at the people, the events, and the news surrounding Las Vegas and the entire Vegas Valley. Hello, I'm Steve Schorr. We are live from the Liberace Mansion. Actually, we are now in the middle of what is called his dining room, Lee's famous dining room, where he just did so many wonderful dinners with all of his friends and his entertainment stars. It was an amazing place. Great food, great friendship. That was Lee and Las Vegas. The great thing about this particular room is how elegant it was. It showed a part of Lee. There is a part of Las Vegas that a lot of people always ask about, but they really don't know, and that is the restaurants. How do you find out where to go, what to eat, and which ones not to go to? Our very special guest on the program today has become a master at telling us all about that. As a matter of fact, the author of this wonderful book called Eating Las Vegas. You'll meet John Curtas in just a couple of seconds. Stay with us. We'll be right back. You know, if you live in Las Vegas and people come to Las Vegas, the one question you're asked more than any is, where should I go eat? That is a much tougher question than most people think, because eating Las Vegas is truly an art. On our program today, we have a very special guest, a man who I think has become the Walter Cronkite of menus, the Julia Child of all critics. He is indeed the food critic of Las Vegas, and we're honored to have as a special guest John Curtas. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me in your lovely home, Steve.
This is Liberace's house. Is this a dining room table, or is this a dining room table?
I tell you, this is the ultimate dining room table, I think. Oh man, can you imagine the parties I used to have here?
I was lucky enough to have dinner with Lee in this dining room.
I'll be darned.
And it was the most amazing dinner I think I've ever had.
Oh God.
Because Lee was one of these great people who would not only be a great and gracious host, his conversation was always wonderful. Always wonderful.
Did he play the piano afterwards?
He did.
I bet. Oh, that's great.
So, author of this book called Eating Las Vegas 2018. I want to get to that in a second. But listen, you're about as far away from what I would expect a critic to be as I could think. I mean, you're a lawyer by trade, correct?
Yes, yeah. Long-time lawyer now.
Long-time lawyer.
Yeah.
Okay, you even called in your book, when I read it, you said there are three types of critics. The slobs, the snobs, and the goody-goodies.
And the old goody. Oh, you did read the book.
That's right. Which one are you?
Well, I've evolved, and I started out as an oh goody-goody. I was I could call it gourmand. Everything was great, and I wanted to eat everywhere. I wanted to eat every cheeseburger in the world, and every taco, and every famous French restaurant. And so I started out that way about 40 years ago. In the last decade or so, I've probably become a total snob. Now I'm not interested in, no offense, your grandmother's little taco shop anymore. I just want the best of everything. So I'm a snob now, and that gets me in trouble sometimes.
But your background is, and you talk about it in the book, your background is that as a child in the 60s, your family took you to restaurants all the time. Oh, yeah. So you gained a great knowledge about food from what I believed was a great time in our food history.
Oh, it was the 60s. I mean, and I like to say about becoming an epicure, connoisseur of anything, you have to start young. I don't care what it is, art, music, you name it, food. And I started probably when I was about 8, 9 years old. We started traveling the country from Miami to Seattle to New York to Pennsylvania to Los Angeles. And my parents weren't gourmets of any kind. My mom's not a great cook. I tease her to this day. She's 93, and I still tease her about what a lousy cook she was. They weren't any kind of Epicurean feast at my house. But when we traveled, my dad always wanted to go to the best restaurant in town. And so even from age 10 onward, when we were in New York City or Los Angeles, we were going, or like I remember Ernie's in San Francisco when it was the bomb there, and the Persian Room in New York City, and the Colony in New York. I was doing all this when I was like not even a teenager yet. So that gave me that foundation, I think, I've built upon now for a few years. A few years, yes.
Yeah, I want to get into the restaurants, but I want to first talk about what I call it today chef love. And I think there's a fascinating about chefs today. You call it chef worship in your book.
Yeah.
And there is a certain amount of worship. To me, though, it's just me. that some of the restaurants with the famous names of chefs on them are not what the famous chefs were made out of. It just seems as though they've stuck their name on them and say, okay, come to my restaurant.
That's all they do. I mean, now it's shameful. I mean, I give people grief about this on my blog, in the book, all the time, because Vegas is like the epicenter of that. We're basically just taking advantage of tourists and rubes and unsophisticated people. Sometimes I derogatorily call them yokels. I don't really mean it in the sense that they just don't understand what's really going on, and so they are attracted to a Bobby Flay restaurant or a Gordon Ramsay restaurant, thinking they're getting that chef. That chef comes through town once or twice a year to pick up a check and get his picture taken in front of the restaurant. It's a management deal. It's a license agreement. They have nothing to do with these restaurants.
But there are some.
There are a few, oh yeah.
The Joel Rubichons of the world and the Guy Savoys of the world. Yeah. There are some that are really top of the line.
Well, I admire the French guys a lot because I think the French chefs, these classic, Guy, of course, and Robuchon, Pierre Gagnère, Daniel Boulud, when he was in town, he's left now. They, I think, take a deeper pride in their product than a lot of these American guys who just, I think, want to pick up the check. And when I see something like, we're having some food festival coming up in May called Vegas Uncorked, featuring Gordon Ramsay as the big star, I think it's just a joke. It's just a complete joke. I mean, they're just taking advantage of people for selling something that isn't really there.
So in your book, you talk about what you call and label the 52 essential restaurants of Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And there's a combination of those on the Las Vegas Strip in the hotels and those in the community, the ones that I happen to love.
I try to mix it up, and yeah, it's about half and half, I think, in the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll never be able to go through all 52, but I thought we would go through a couple that I wrote down and said, okay, I want to find out why you think this is such a great place.
You're going to make me remember what I wrote in the book now, aren't you?
Carnivino is one that Carnivino is one that you really hold very, very highly. Matter of fact, I think your quote in the book was, not only is this a great steakhouse in Las Vegas, could be the greatest steakhouse in America. That's your quote.
I've thought that for almost 10
Why?
years now. Well, because it's not just a steakhouse. It's also an amazing Italian restaurant. If Carnivino was in Los Angeles or Chicago or in New York City, it would be considered one of, if not the best Italian restaurant in America. I think it gets short shrifted in Las Vegas because we're Vegas, because a lot of the food critics and the national food press looks upon Las Vegas as Branson, Missouri with better restaurants. So we don't get the respect.
That's terrible.
But it's true. I mean, that's why we get overlooked by James Beard all the time. And but if you go to Carnivino, and it's been run by this little dynamo lady named Nicole Brisson. She's been the head chef now there for, I think, 8 or 9 years. And she just puts out Italian food. She trained in Italy. She's not Italian, but she loves Italian food. And they cure their own sausages. They make their own pastas. The seafood is wonderful, and they happen to have some of the best steaks in America because they age their own meat on premises.
Okay, two that you mentioned that we've already talked about are to me some of the probably the most expensive restaurants in town, but the most unique, and that's Rubichon and that's Savoy.
Yeah.
They are amazing restaurants, but you got to go there with a lot of money in your pocket because it's not cheap.
Oh, you should do what I do. Just make sure someone else is paying.
That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, these are, I like to say, they're a car payment for dinner. Okay?
They are.
Okay. Each one of your dinners is going to be a car payment. But then I see, to be fair, I see what a ticket to Britney Spears costs. Okay. Or suddenly Madonna comes to town and people are shelling out $500 to watch or Cher. Okay. Cher gets on stage, sings 3 songs, has 93 backup dancers in front of her, makes a few jokes, walks off. You're out $450. I'm nothing against Cher fans, but if you're willing to take at least when you're eating a meal at Guy Savoy or Robuchon, there are a battery of chefs. There's a dozen chefs back there making sure every little thing on the plate is perfect. And you can only get that in places like New York, London, Paris, and Las Vegas.
In your book, you highlight some really, I think, really cool local restaurants. Let me give you a few. Eat is one. EATT is one.
Again, French guys.
French guys.
Young French guys. Yeah.
Ferraro's, which is
Our favorite.
Our favorite.
Yeah.
Gino is just wonderful at
Yeah.
Ferraro's, and a place that is so unique, and if people go downtown to find it, they'll go, oh, I'm not going there for dinner.
Yeah,
That's Carson Kitchen.
Carson Kitchen's great. Yeah.
It's an amazing restaurant.
Right.
What makes to you an amazing restaurant? Is it the food? Is it the ambiance? Is it the service? What makes that becomes a 52 essential?
I think it's a sense of passion that you feel. It's almost visceral. It's something when you're in the place, and if you go to these places more than once, and I go to all these places all the time, but even my first time in a restaurant, like EATT, for example, the first time I walked in there, they had no idea who I was. I mean, I was there. Yeah. Well, I can still sneak around a little bit in this town, but I walked in and I could just see the guys working, and it was a sense, it was a feeling, it was an ambience in the room, and then the food showed up, and you could just tell by looking at the plate and feeling the feeling in the room with the waiters and everyone that there was passion behind it. And you get that at Carson Kitchen, you get it at EATT, and you get it at the Carnivinos and the Robichons of the world, because that's what they're about. You can tell when a restaurant is a money restaurant. There's money restaurants and there's passion restaurants. And even a famous restaurant like a Robichon can be both. But the money restaurants are the ones like Ramsey's and Bobby Flay's and Giada's. These are just celebrity. They're money restaurants. They're celebrity chef licensing deals, and that's it.
I want to take a break. When I come back, I want to talk about something that you have in the book that food critics would go, he has what in his book? We're going to find out what is in just a couple of seconds.
I'm dying to know.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. It is called Eating Las Vegas, and when you go to the restaurants in Las Vegas, most of the time it's a wonderful, unique experience. Sometimes, though, it's even more than you expected. Our very special guest on the program, the food critic of Las Vegas, John Curtas. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm fascinated by this book, by the way, and I have to be honest. I've read every single page, and because if you live here, you need to know where the great restaurants are.
Well, you should, yes. We live in a great town for that.
But I am shocked, John Curtas, that there is an entire section in your book about famous restaurants and the great restaurants that talks about buffets. Really?
Okay.
John Curtas,
Yes,
buffets?
the mighty have fallen.
But there are.
We do have good buffets in this town.
There are amazing buffets.
But they're
in
not
Las
cheap.
Vegas. Oh, no.
You
oh,
know,
no.
I mean, and it's an easy rule of thumb with the buffet, Steve. The best hotels have the best buffets. The fanciest hotels have the fanciest and the best buffets.
I'm fascinated with the buffet at Caesars called Bacchanal. Now,
Yeah.
When I first came to Las Vegas, Bacchanal was like one of the great restaurants of Caesar. It wasn't a buffet. It was a great, with the wine goddesses. It was, you'd get a massage while you were having dinner.
Right.
It was a great restaurant.
My mother ate there, I think, in 1969 or 1972. She still talks about her Bacchanal meal.
Oh, yeah. I ate there from 1976 through about until it closed.
Yeah.
It was a great restaurant. But Bacchanal, as far as a buffet, is a plethora of food that could drive you crazy.
Oh yeah, it's overkill really, but it's good. I mean, it's sensory overload. But you know, just what they do at Bacchanal is really nice. I mean, they have all these fresh made stations there. And that's the cool thing in our buffets now. It's not a bunch of steamer tray food. They have a chef there, you know, actually grilling the fajita meat in front of you and actually baking the pizzas right under your own nose. So I think that shows a really a nice upscaling of the whole buffet experience. But again, you pay for it.
Of course. Same thing at the Wynn.
Oh, yeah.
Another great buffet at
Yeah.
the Wynn. Another great buffet is at Bellagio.
Cosmo has a great one.
Cosmo has a great
the Wicked
buffet.
Spoon, I think they call
But I
it.
think sometimes even locals kind of don't go to the casinos and don't even think about going to the buffets. But it's a pretty cool meal.
It's a cool meal, and it's great for guests. And I got kind of won over to buffets. I know as food snob like me, he's not supposed to like them. But my wife used to work on malls here in town, and she used to entertain a lot of foreign, especially Asian customers. And she said, good buffets like that are a godsend to people who don't speak the language very well, and they want to have a Vegas experience, but they can't deal with the interaction between the waiters and everything that we take for granted, we don't think anything of. And the fact that they can go and have a really, really nice food experience and not have to deal with the trouble with the language, I think is a very good thing. And that won me over when I
Now, the other thing that you have in your book is something that I've been following you on Facebook. You now have this fascination with French pastry, as in French breads. Now you have this fascination. I have to tell you, John. But I have now been sitting here for 20 minutes.
And you haven't taken a bite?
No. With this wonderful sense wafting up into my nose. We have great baguettes of bread, wonderful French pastries. Has Las Vegas become someplace where you can find great French and pastries by its own?
Yes, but just like in the last few years, just less than 5 years, maybe about 4 years ago, we started getting Patisserie Manon, I think was the first one. Bouchon has always done their own baking. Thomas Keller's Bouchon and Venetian, and that's wonderful. But suddenly in the last 3 years, we have Delice Gourmand's French Bakery, where all this beautiful stuff comes from. Café Brez, which is out in the southwest part of town, and the Rosalie Cafe, Le Rosalie, the French cafe, also in the southwest part of town.
Chef Fleming's.
Yeah. Chef Fleming's in Henderson.
Yes.
It's on Water Street.
It's a wonderful big shop that people don't even know about.
Yeah, but it's the best reason to eat on Water Street.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Sorry, I missed that reference at first. But yeah, so just in the last, Fleming's has been there a long time. But these other French they're young guys, and they're baking everything from scratch. I mean, the croissant, you look at this. This is the kind of crispy and buttery croissant that you don't get at Albertsons or Smith's, okay? And everything comes out of their ovens every morning from fresh made bread.
It's the aroma.
Oh, the aroma. And even now these, we're taping this in the afternoon. I picked these up this morning, and the aromas are still coming out.
And the bread.
Yeah, the bread. It's just. I want to show you if I can do without hurting it. You look for this kind of crackle and crust out of here. This beautiful crumb. It has a nice sour. You get this beautiful bread, but kind of a sourdough starter kind of aroma off it, like nothing you get unless it's made right there. And we now have 3 bake shops in town that do this every day.
And it is that one thing that I think completes a dinner. That if you want to have a great dinner and you have lousy bread, you have a lousy dinner. Just me.
And it doesn't just sitting down at a great meal and suddenly warm bread comes in and you just take a bite and you go, you just know you're in good hands.
And when the bread comes and it's all cold and stale, it's been there for a week, you go, no.
You know my other pet peeve? Rock hard butter. When they bring you butter and it's obviously almost frozen and you got the finger, trying to spread it.
Or else it's still wrapped in the little the little metal, and you got to hold it in your hand until it gets soft.
I forget. I've never tried that before.
Yeah. When it comes in a little pats, you just hold it in your hand for a while and then it gets soft.
Steve Schorr, you've taught the restaurant critic something. I have never thought of it. I just get there and fume and yell at the butter all
just hold it in your hand for a little bit.
Yeah, but again, back to the French pastries. Delice Gourmands, these are great bakeries, and we didn't have these here 5 years ago. And I'm hoping more of them. They're very successful, all 3 of them, and it shows just one item on the upgrade that's happened in our neighborhoods.
Our community has become sophisticated and has begun to develop a sophisticated palate for food. And we haven't had that before.
No, better in the last 10 years. I think 10 years especially.
Listen, I was here during the era of Chateau Vegas.
You date yourself, Mr.
I know.
Schorr.
And the Alpine Village.
Well, I still do. We all love the Alpine Village.
Alpine Village was one of the
peanuts on the floor,
exactly.
the crudité platter.
Greatest chicken soup ever.
Yeah, and people, when I say that on my blog, I still get people writing in about the Alpine Village Inn.
Yes.
It was great. For those of you who love the Alpine Village Inn, it doesn't have nearly the ambience, but Cafe Berlin out South Decatur.
Really?
Has very, very good German food. And we have this giant Hofbrauhaus, which is basically a franchise from Germany, but it does very good German food too.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Okay.
One of the things that you have in your book, besides the 52 essentials, are the 10 places not to go to.
Yeah, I gored a couple of your oxes in there.
Yes, you did. You really did. And I disagree with a few of them. I have to admit that I do. And I'm going to take you back to one, and I'm going to convince you that it's not one of them.
Should we get our knives ready?
But tell me why some of those restaurants
My
are
bottom 10?
Your bottom 10.
Well, first of all, very quickly, the reason we put a bottom 10 in there is I think if you're going to go on a limb and profess to be a critic who knows a lot about anything and tell people what the best of anything is, you owe it to your listeners and your readers to at least point out some things that aren't so good. Now, I have a little fun with the bottom 10. It changes every year in the book, but I try to pick popular restaurants that are either doing the same thing and never changing a darn thing, or they've slid so far that they're just a shell of what they used to be. Now, one of yours, I know, Michael's, is a big favorite with Old Vegas, and it's a big fancy place in the South Coast Plaza?
South Coast.
South Coast. But Michael's is doing the same menu with the same little amuse-bouche and the same little sorbet palate cleanser that they did in 1981.
I love it. I'm sorry, I love it. And the service is impeccable.
The service is impeccable, but the wine list is terrible. I mean, it's an embarrassingly bad for a fancy restaurant. Very bad wine.
One of the great fillet of soles you'll have.
Yes, it's the size of the
it's the size of the table.
Yeah,
it is. It's the size of the table.
No, some of the food they do there is great, but some of it. I mean, I have eaten Michael's probably half a dozen times over the years. The last time I went there, the Caesar salad was limp and stale, and there weren't enough good things to counterbalance what I thought the bad things were. And the check will knock you over. I mean, you better have a defibrillator ready to go when you get the check there. Okay. So that was one. What's the other one? The other one, the bootlegger. It's just so terrible.
It's a traditional place in Las Vegas.
I know, but
I know.
It was terrible 20 years ago. It's still terrible. I mean, there's so much. And again, the thing about the bootlegger is when Vegas didn't have anything else, when it was Chateau Vegas and the Alpine Village Inn, bootlegger was great and fine. But we have gone so far past that. We've eclipsed that kind of Italian food.
Well,
but it hangs on.
You are a true treasure of Las Vegas. I honestly believe that. And I think what you've done in this book is given all of us here in Las Vegas, as well as anybody who comes to Las Vegas, a heads up on where to go and what to eat, because you even have some tips in here on what are the better foods at those restaurants. John Curtis, thank you for being with us.
It was my pleasure.
And we'll do this. We will, at any time, you are invited back, and we'd love to talk more about your favorite places and the places that I'm going to convince you are not as bad as you think. We'll be back with some closing words in just a second. Well, it's amazing to me how many great restaurants there are in Las Vegas. Restaurants not only on the Las Vegas Strip, but also in the community, the cities, the areas, the rural communities of Las Vegas. There are so many places to go. You know, if you live here, or if you're coming to Las Vegas, or even planning to come to Las Vegas, something like eating Las Vegas is important to have. The one thing I will say about Las Vegas is we're never what people think we are. We are still a community, and our restaurants are still the places where our communities, our families, get to sit and break bread. It's the best. Until the next time, be safe and enjoy life under the Vegas sun.